There's a verse in the Bible where God commands the mass unalivings of the Amalekites. 1 Samuel 15:3 reads, "Now go attack Amalek and utterly destroy all they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey."
Okay, there's a lot of context that needs to go into verses like these, and especially when we're examining ancient documents that were written well over, 2,000 years ago. It's important that we look at the language and how things were said during that time. Now, in the verse he quoted in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3, where God commands, everybody to be killed, infant, women, um, animals, example, right? We have to understand that a lot of times during that time, this would be known as ancient Near East hyperbole. Now, what I mean is, a lot of the times when people would report what to do or when people would command a certain group to go do something, it wasn't actually literal. It would just be hyperbolic. An example of this would be in Joshua chapter 10, verse 36, where it's reported about what's going on between the war of the Canaanites and the Israelites. And in that chapter, it says that everybody within Hebron was erased, pretty much, and none of them were left. Now, if you're looking at that, you're going to think, dang, this is total extinction. Nobody was actually left in Hebron. But when you read the very next chapter in Joshua chapter 11, it says the Israelites went to go pursue the people of Hebron. But hold on, let's wait for a second. But if Joshua chapter 10 told us that everybody in Hebron was dead, who were they pursuing in Joshua chapter 11? It goes to show that a lot of times in the ancient Near East, they would use hyperbolic war language. And Paul Copan, biblical Old Testament scholar, he goes into detail on this in his book called Is God a Moral Monster? And he has another book called Does God Commit Genocide? So in both those two books, I would recommend anybody listening to this to go read them. He goes into very great detail about how a lot of times in the ancient Near East, they would use hyperbolic war language. Secondly, we also have to understand that we have to read things within context. In this same chapter, in 1 Samuel chapter 15, it says that all of the Amalekites in Havilah and Shur were destroyed. So I want you to remember the two locations I just named. It said that the Amalekites in Havilah and Shur were destroyed. But here's the interesting thing. When we read 1 Samuel chapter 27, it says the Amalekites were back. Well, I thought all the Amalekites were destroyed in 1 Samuel chapter 15. So how is it possible that they came back? Well, it's like what I mentioned earlier about how a lot of times they would use hyperbolic war language. For example, in 1 Samuel chapter 27, it says that the inhabitants were living in Shur. Now, hold on, let's wait for a second. If everybody was destroyed as far as Havilah and Shur, how is it possible that people were still living in Shur by the time you get to 1 Samuel chapter 27? Now, some people might say, oh, what if these were new Amalekites that moved in? But if you actually read the text plainly, it would not support that because it said that the inhabitants of Shur, the Amalekites, were in there since the days of old. Well, days of old, that Hebrew word, it refers to ancient times, or in some contexts, it can refer to eternity. But obviously, it's talking about human beings. So within this context, it's talking about ancient times. So it's saying the inhabitants, the Amalekites who were in Shur, they've been there well before 1 Samuel chapter 15, or well before during the time of David. Now, this gives us context that a lot of times that within the Bible, when it reports that something happened, it is not literal. It would be ancient Near East hyperbolic war language. This is actually evident outside of the Bible as well. We have something called the Merneptah Stele. And in the Merneptah Stele, there's an inscription written about Israel. And in it, it says that Israel has been utterly destroyed forever. Now, when you read that, you're going to think, well, man, Israel must have been extinct. But obviously, we know that is not the case. And people would record things like this just to exaggerate or, put on hyperbole. So this was very common within the ancient Near East. And like I said, if anybody is curious about these Old Testament topics, please go read the book by Paul Copan. Either Is God a Moral Monster or Did God Commit Genocide? Both of them are fantastic books.
You will not believe what the context for this is. So 400 years prior, the Amalekites had attacked Israel. And God thought, let's wait 400 years and let's punish people who weren't even there at the time by utterly destroying them.
Yeah, so this is just not true and isn't the full context at all. To say that the Amalekites were simply commanded to be destroyed simply because of what happened 400 years ago is far from what the actual context is. So in the event he's talking about is Exodus chapter 17. When the Israelites were done crossing the Red Sea, you see that the Amalekites attacked them. But the Amalekites continuously oppressed the Israelites after this. It's not just we're talking about the 400-year event that happened in Exodus chapter 17. When you keep reading in Judges chapter 3, you see that the Amalekites joined the Ammonites in fighting Israel, literally trying to kill them. And then you see this in Judges chapter 6, where the Amalekites were literally oppressing Israel to the point where they were stealing their food, they were plundering their food. So they would go to these Israelite nations and they would literally go to their land and plunder all of their food. So for you to say that they were being commanded for something that they did 400 years ago, that's not the case. The people who were living during that time in 1 Samuel chapter 15, they have clearly shown signs, especially from not too long ago, that they were plunderers, that they would go and oppress people. As a matter of fact, in 1 Samuel chapter 14, the chapter literally right before in verse 48, you see that Saul has to save the Israelites from the Amalekites because the Amalekites were oppressors. So to say that all of this simply stemmed from what happened in Exodus chapter 17, which was 400 years before, whatever happened in 1 Samuel chapter 15, is actually a little bit longer than that. That's actually not the case. You see in Judges, you see in Numbers, and you see in Samuel that the Amalekites oppress Israel. So you would have to substantiate how this only is talking about the event that happened in Exodus chapter 17. But when you read the context, that is just simply not the case.